Welcome to DeathWatch, the Star Wars podcast from a galaxy not so far away. I'm Chris Skull, and today we're joined by friend of the show, V. Antonioli. She's going to talk about one of the more intriguing characters of the Star Wars universe, Grand Admiral Thrawn. So before we jump in, we want to announce some really great news. There's a new child of the Watch. Mike and his wife had a baby last week. We hope for the best for this latest addition to the Bennett family. So as we've seen on screen, Thrawn primarily is in the Rebels show. He's the lead antagonist for seasons 3 and 4. However, we got a major name drop in Chapter 13, The Jedi of the Mandalorian. So Ahsoka is seeking him out as a person of interest for reasons unknown. But today, we're going to go into the history of the character, how he fits in the Star Wars timeline, and we're going to discuss if and where we might see him next. But before we do that, let's introduce V. So V, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I am V. Antonioli. I'm also AlderaanSurvivor, if you've seen me on social media somewhere. I've been a Star Wars fan for better part of 20 years. I remember seeing The Phantom Menace in theaters when I was 5. So Star Wars is pretty near and dear to my heart, and I really love talking about it. Especially Thrawn. He's a little newer to me, but it just resonated with me as soon as I started reading the books. He's just a great character. I can't wait to talk about him.
You actually have, if you're listening on the podcast, she actually has like stacks of books right behind her, and a little Thrawn figurine too.
Yes,
which you got from Galaxy's Edge, right?
I did. Yeah, I saw. I can't believe I found that. I was shocked. The little shops in Blackspire Outpost, I just walked in there and I was like, blue. That's my guy.
That's my chissy.
Yeah. The lady working at the shop was like, I knew he looked familiar. I was in like all Thrawn get up with my Thrawn Disney ears and everything.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Thrawn bounding?
Yes.
Yeah. So I like to ask icebreaker questions to my guests. Sort of have the tradition of asking about your favorite Star Wars movies and maybe your least favorite. Mm-hmm. So if you can give me your top 3 and then maybe your least favorite
of the movies.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it can also include I guess there's been like these lists I've participated in. I would include Clone Wars and Rebels.
Okay.
Because they like in their entirety, they're almost cinematic. So if you want to include those two, those as well, you can.
So I feel like it changes all the time. It's kind of like picking a favorite child. You don't want to, but like there's kind of that one that sticks out.
Oh no, absolutely.
So I would have to say right now, Rebels has got to be my favorite, just in its entirety. Mm-hmm. I feel like the first season was kind of slow, but it was good overall. Some of the most heartbreaking moments happened in that movie. In the show.
It practically is a movie.
It's basically a movie. Yeah. It's like 4 whole movies. Mm-hmm. And then I would have to say Phantom Menace, purely for the nostalgic factor. I think that it is an interesting movie, like film wise.
Yeah.
And that like movie making wise, it's interesting. Yeah. But it's nostalgic. And then I would have to say Empire Strikes Back as my third favorite.
I feel like on average that one gets a lot of love. It's never number 1, but it's definitely top 3.
Yeah.
I've started noticing that. Phantom Menace, I get it because it was different. I mean, I don't. That was probably did you see that in theaters when it first came out?
Yeah, I was 5 and I went with my dad.
Yeah.
It's just nostalgic. I remember when I went, I didn't have any prior knowledge of Star Wars, so I just thought that was the first Star Wars movie. And then I think I was maybe like 10 or 11 when I finally found out there were more movies.
Oh, that blew your mind.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
And then I was like, why do they look so old? What number is this? How do they do that? So
what's up with the dude with the horns?
Right.
What's your least favorite?
least favorite. This was my favorite question that you asked, Alan. What's your least favorite, and why is it The Last Jedi?
Yeah.
Honestly, I think I'm gonna have to say The Last Jedi because I have only seen it maybe twice.
That's actually one more time than I've seen it.
I just don't. For the sequels in general, I don't really have a connection to them. Just because, kind of growing up with all of the other ones, and then the sequels show up, and it's just different.
Mhm.
I wouldn't say they're bad. I love
I
the
would.
movies.
Well, at least The Last Jedi. I would say that, but I would agree with you. I grew up on the VHS tapes of the original
Right,
trilogy, and then I saw the prequels as a teen. And it really was just different. So it's always going to be 50-50. It's
right,
like you like it or you don't.
right.
So I got another question for you. If you
Okay.
had 24 hours to live as any Star Wars character, who would it be, and why is it Jar Jar Binks?
So, you know what? I hadn't thought about that. Misa likey. Can you imagine? That would actually be pretty fun to be down with the frog people in the Gungan City.
They're called
Then again,
Gungans V.
I that's a good question. So I've been thinking about it. Probably, oh God, I'm gonna butcher her name. So with the Chiss names, it's gonna be a lot of butchering today.
Better you than me.
But her name is Mithali Astov. She is one of the primary characters in Chaos Rising. She's such a cool character.
Isn't she one they call them the Skywalkers?
She's a former Skywalker.
Okay.
You could also call them navigators. I was kind of trying to figure out how to explain this concept that wasn't like too hard to
Mm-hmm.
explain. But yeah, she's a former Skywalker, former Chiss navigator. And she kind of comes into her own power in the book. And she kind of gets this different role. It's the new Chaos Rising books are just very different from the regular Star Wars universe. So if you don't really resonate with the Star Wars galaxy, you can always just hop into the unknown regions, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff there.
Yeah.
So but she's a fantastic character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you're
And
force sensitive, right?
to a degree, the Chaos Rising book really gave me another perspective on force sensitivity and how that manifests differently in different people. For example, the Chiss, they have either second or third sight. I believe third sight is the one where it's just precognition, which is essentially what Anakin was using when he was pod racing. That's, foresight, where you can kind of see what's happening before it happens, and he can navigate the pod racer.
Mm-hmm.
But second sight is, I believe it's something about feeding off of emotions, or you can kind of feel what the other person's feeling, or
Like an empath.
something like that. Yeah, something like that. And I can't remember if that goes with I can never remember what this one's called when you lift things up and stuff. What the heck
Telekinesis.
is that called? Telekinesis, yes.
Right.
I can't remember if that includes telekinesis or not.
I think that is literally telekinesis. Telepathy is when you're doing like mind reading. So it's like
yes,
Professor X versus Jean Grey kind of.
Yes. So with Mithali Astov, or Thalius, that's her core name. The core name is Thalius. She was a former Chiss navigator who had third sight. That she could navigate, and she could do all that stuff. But by the time that they are, I think, 13 or 14, they lose that ability. They no longer have it. So she turns into a I can't remember what they're called. They're basically caretakers for the young Chiss Skywalkers, the
Okay,
new ones that come up.
like mentors almost.
Sort of, yeah. They're like live-in nannies kind of thing, just making sure that they're
Okay.
getting fed and
Thank you.
bathed and
Thank you for your work for the Chiss Imperial Navy. Now go change some diapers.
right.
Sheesh, man.
Yeah.
What a way to,
I
oh, and you're doing this, by the way, you're 14.
right.
Thank you for your service. Use some
Yeah.
baby powder. I kind of noticed, I didn't clarify in the document. I
Mhm.
meant Star Wars list, but it's interesting you put your favorite Star Wars characters. And
Oh yeah, I
I
did.
think you put Thrawn, Dooku, and Padme, and
I
I feel like
did.
that's a pretty good. Those are some very strong characters in their
Yeah.
own right. In least favorite, you put Arinda Price and you put
Yeah,
Brendel Hux,
I did.
who were the Imperial and First Order protagonists, respectively. But
Mhm.
you also put Kiadi Mundi, the Jedi.
Yes.
Why? Did
This
he not fend for the Wookiees?
this character causes me so much grief.
Yeah.
And it's literally just because I'm petty. It has nothing to do with
Those are
his
usually the best
character.
reasons.
It's just because of every time I talk about relationships within the Jedi, and that sort of thing, I always get comments on my TikTok saying, "Well, what about Kiari Bundy and his 17 wives?" And I'm like,
Was it that many, or is it just? I heard it was just 2.
there is it's a Legends concept, and I think it was more than 5, I think. And he had like a whole bunch of kids and stuff, and it was because his species wasn't they couldn't have lots of
Yeah.
kids or something like that. They were
Yeah,
dying
I
out.
had heard that they were dying out or something like that. I think that was just a loophole that he made up.
Yeah.
He just passed a memo around. Oh, by the way, my species is dying. Oh,
Right.
okay. Well,
They're
all
like,
right.
"Oh, all
Okay.
right,
Well,
well, cool. Go have fun, I guess."
yeah. No one
Um,
can have relationships except for this guy.
exactly.
No marriages. Anakin.
Yeah.
This guy's
So,
cool. It's fine.
it's always the people that are just like, "Well, what about Yadi Bundy?" And I'm like, "Oh, God, I'm gonna have to explain again that this is a Legends concept, and it's I'm not talking about
Yeah,
Legends."
it's tough, man. That Legends versus canon thing. But this is actually a good example of that. This character, and that's the reason why I wanted to talk about him, because
Mhm.
we it's more than just a synopsis of what we've seen him do. It's more
Right.
like he's like Filoni and now Favreau and
Mhm.
everybody involved in the Lucasfilm writing. They are pulling examples of canon and repurposing them.
Yeah.
So the question now is, if we get a character like Thrawn and his story being tweaked, it's not one to one.
Mhm.
But if we're seeing an example of him being put into canon, who else could we see? So that's like sort of like
Yeah.
the overarching question that I want to that I want to ask, moving forward.
Yeah.
So why don't we dive in and we'll talk a little bit about Thrawn. So the first big question is, who is he?
He is a alien Grand Admiral for the Imperial Navy. I'm not entirely too sure if he is the only alien Grand Admiral in canon. I believe in Legends he was. Um, a lot of the information about Thrawn comes from Legends, which kind of stinks a little bit, but
Hmm.
with all the new books and stuff coming out, we're getting more canon information. But I don't believe we have a lot of information about Grand Admirals in general in
Yeah,
canon.
what we do know is that they've always been old and white.
Right. And then now
So
you have some awesome ones like what's her name? Ray Sloan. She's tight. I I believe she's a big character in the Phasma book. I think in
mhm.
Aftermath too. And then the A New Dawn one with the Hera and Kanan and stuff.
Okay.
She's awesome. Um but yeah, I mean, you have Thrawn and Ray Sloan, and I'm having a hard time thinking of anyone else.
Yeah. It's interesting that that's sort of diversity I mean, they're bad guys, but at least the bad guys are diverse,
Right.
and
Exactly.
they're more inclusive. It's like it's a
Yeah.
progressive, empire, but in the past few years, especially in the, I don't want to say secondary, but they're not the, if the primary storytelling is the movies, the secondary could be shows and books and
Hmm.
graphic novels, that they are including that. So I
Yeah.
thought that was very interesting because, for, in terms of what was canon for a very long time, it was, the empire was very old and white, and,
Yeah.
and male. Like, never did you ever see, rarely do you ever see some female officers,
Yeah.
especially high ranking ones. So I thought it was very interesting that they're being more inclusive of the people you're supposed to hate.
Right. Right.
Um,
Exactly.
how do you, so he has his species, the Chiss,
Yes.
they're found like in the outer rim, or not even the
Uh,
outer rim. It's like the,
Farther
what,
than that.
yeah.
That they are in the unknown regions. It's an entire part of space called Chiss space. There are multiple planets here. Um, there is Rentor, which is where Thrawn was born. He was born to a poor family who didn't really have a reputation or anything. But what ended up happening is that he was basically scouted out because he was a genius, and then he was put into the the Chiss Academy,
Mhm.
essentially, where he got adopted into a royal family. There are 9 ruling families within the Chiss.
Hmm.
So he ended up becoming a merit adoptive um, situation. And then there is Chila, which is the capital um, planet. That's where some of the ruling families live. I can't remember if it's all of them or if it's some of them. Um, I don't have the greatest memory,
That's fine.
but I remember the important parts.
Yeah.
But it's such a cool thing that Zahn was able to basically create this completely separate, gigantic part of the Star Wars universe or the Star
Yeah.
Wars galaxy, because it's technically in the galaxy, but not at the same
Yeah.
time, if that makes
So
any sense.
for reference, you're referring to Timothy Zahn, the
Yes,
author
yes,
of the Thrawn books from back in
yes.
the
Ni
80s,
90s,
in the
90s.
90s, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's very interesting how an author, I mean, I'm not sure if this is how it works exactly. There's some authors that I actually want to bring on the podcast, and I want to pick their brain on this, but like, how much autonomy do they have when it comes
Right.
to, do they have the, I mean, if they're Star Wars fans, they already know what is and what isn't part of it,
Yeah.
but then there could be like a rough outline of what to include, but then in terms of the details, they just sort of flesh out on their own. And I wonder if
Right.
that's something that Zahn had, because if that was the case, then he wilded out,
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
with Thrawn's character.
He did all sorts of stuff. Um, so in his original books, I don't think, um, I know that George Lucas had said, these books, I don't really see them as canon. It's just an expanded universe, so it's not real.
Hmm.
Um, but I believe he did have contacts at Lucasfilm, um, that basically guided him and let him know, what was a thing, what wasn't a thing. Didn't really tell him what he couldn't do because it was technically like an alternate universe sort of a
Hmm.
situation. Um, but I think the cool thing about the new canon books that are coming out that he's also writing, he's writing all of
Oh,
the Thrawn
oh,
books.
that's awesome.
Um, he is referencing in especially the newer ones, the Ascendancy series that's not all of them are out yet, just the first one is. He's referencing a book that he wrote, I can't remember if it's in the 90s or the early 2000s, it's called, Outbound Flight. Um, so he's referencing a particular event that happened within that book, and then that makes that canon, so it's like,
Yeah, but then,
how far are we gonna go?
yeah, but then there's that overarching argument as to what is and what isn't canon, and
Exactly.
you just sort of have to, man, it's such a weird period
Yeah.
of time being a Star Wars fan today,
Yeah.
because ever since of the legal acquisition of the Star Wars rights, now it's sort of like a grab bag
Yeah.
versus if you were a fan, maybe just before the prequels hit, you
Hmm.
had like almost 30 years, well, like 20 years of material in
Right.
comic books and novelizations of building material. It's interesting that Timothy Zahn's being involved in the process again, because I can't remember her name right now, but there was an author who she wrote several books on the Mandalorians. And then as soon as Filoni introduced the idea that the Mandalorians were, even for a period of time, were not warmongers, that they were actually trying to be a peaceful people,
Hmm.
um, that completely scrapped that chunk of legends history for the Mandalorians, and now they're completely starting from scratch. And she's not getting involved in any future novelization or storytelling regarding the Mandalorians. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like there's pros and cons to reintroducing these characters.
Right.
It comes down to a matter of whoever is the decision making, whatever, or whoever's doing the decision making, what they think is going to be,
And
canon or not
that
anymore.
that's also kind of interesting because I can't remember if I mentioned it anywhere in the document, but um Timothy Zahn had no idea that Thrawn was going to be included in Rebels. He had
Hmm.
literally no idea.
Hmm.
He was invited to, I believe it was at like Star Wars Celebration or something like that, where it was like,
Wow. Could you
it was
imagine
like,
finding out that your child, your
yeah,
basically your brainchild is now somewhere else? It's like,
yeah. It was
and
after,
you find out at the watch party.
basically, yeah. They were like, here's the trailer for it, and he was like, and then the name.
Dave, we need to
So
talk.
I feel like, with that said, there is a very large disconnect between the character and how he is written and how he is portrayed in like visual media.
Mhm.
Um, Very large disconnect, which sucks.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I mean, even in The Mandalorian, he had no idea that that was going to happen. He found out on Facebook.
Which
Fans
is
were writing on
officially
his
the
wall.
worst way to find anything out.
Fans were writing on his Facebook posts or whatever, like, "Oh man, can't wait to see Thrawn in
And
the
he's like,
Mandalorian or
neither
whatever."
can
And he's
I.
like, "What are you talking about?"
I guess me too.
He had no clue
How
until
do
everyone else
we pronounce, if
knew.
we can, how do we pronounce Thrawn's real name?
All right, so the
I'll give
other
you 3
day,
tries.
the other day I was sitting in my bathroom and I'm like, Mithranorodo. It's
Ding
Mithranorodo.
dong.
It is Mithranorodo.
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 I can't remember if this was fan art or if this was an actual graphic novel where Anakin is trying to pronounce Thrawn's name.
Yes,
Which, by
that.
the way, there is a novelization where young Anakin during the Clone Wars and Thrawn, when he's part of the Chiss Academy
Mhm.
or Chiss Navy, they actually meet.
Yes, that is in Alliances. Yeah.
Right. So Anakin is trying to pronounce Thrawn's name and he keeps butchering it. And Thrawn is
Yes.
like, no, this is the way. And Anakin's like,
Yep.
yeah, that's what I said. No, it's this. And Anakin's like, yeah, I know, that's what I said. And at the end, Thrawn is like, okay, fine, whatever.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
That's, pretty much exactly what happened in the book.
This
That is
that's
canon
that's
information.
the book, by the way. That's the whole book. Two of
It's
them
just
meeting for
them.
coffee, and Anakin keeps butchering
Oh,
Thrawn's
man.
name.
Someone asked me on, one of my friends TikTok friends asked me, they were like, "You should get into cosplay and just, like, pretend to do, like, a Starbucks skit where
That'd be
Thrawn's
amazing.
name's being called, and
That would
it
be
says
amazing.
something like
I mean,
something weird."
you've got the cosplay, you got your half
Yeah.
down. Now you only need is someone to duet you with like an Anakin cosplay. I think that'd be great.
Exactly. I almost just wanna do it myself because
That-
I love
That'd
it
be
so
pretty cool.
much.
What can you tell us about him in terms of his personality?
So I get it depends on, what version of his personality you're talking about.
Okay.
Because there are a couple. There's the book the Canon book personality, which is now granted, the books are written in his perspective, so you get more of an insight into him and the way he thinks. But
because
he
everything
is
before in the 90s was written like in the third person.
pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
He wasn't the main character of the Heir to the Empire trilogy. I believe it was between like Luke and Leia and some other guy.
Okay.
But yeah, he was just kind
Probably
of
the
there.
Emperor, some other dude, whatever.
Some
No big
other
deal.
kid.
Some other guy. I think his name was Palpatine. Sheevy Palps.
Who names their kid Sheev? I don't know.
Sheev, man, such a whack name. It's interesting. So
But
everything's from his perspective now.
yeah, so everything in the canon books are in his perspective. So he is he's a meticulous person. He's someone that likes to think things out. He is he's not a hateful person.
Mhm.
There are many times in some of the books where he says that he regrets the loss of life. He's not out to kill anybody. He's just doing his job, basically, and what he thinks is right, but he's not going to torture people.
I feel like I got that vibe. We got that visually when he was in Rebels.
Mhm.
The impression that we get from him is that he is hyper intelligent,
Yes.
and he is incredibly sound tactfully speaking, but he's also an incredibly skilled fighter.
Yes.
And in the rare occasions where you see him kind of like,
Yeah.
seething, he always just takes a deep breath,
Yeah.
takes a couple of steps back, and then he goes back into his like normal tone, like, no, this is not the way. This is, not how we do things.
Right.
He's very methodical.
Yes.
He's incredibly methodical. I feel like he's almost like he's like the Sherlock Holmes of Star
Yes.
Wars almost.
Yes. Can we call him
Sherlock
Space
Holmes,
Sherlock?
Space Sherlock, yeah.
Space
I actually saw some fan art of Benedict Cumberbatch in, as
Yeah.
Thrawn. And I'm like,
That
like
is
visually, I'm not for it. But in terms of the personality,
Yes.
yes, like that version
Yeah.
of Sherlock would be interesting.
Yes.
Let's talk
Absolutely.
about him in terms of his tactics, so to speak, or rather, you have a note that although he's a tactical genius, he doesn't understand politics. What do you mean by that?
Right. So he this was a pretty big point in the Chaos Rising novelization. Or novelization novel where he kind of came to terms with the fact that he doesn't understand politics. And this is because he can't anticipate politics. You can anticipate warships, but you can't anticipate when someone's just going to change their mind and, maybe someone's not going to give you money to fund your whatever because they didn't like what color shoes you wore or something like that. It's hard to anticipate stuff like that. But with in a tactical sense, in a war sense, I believe his Chiss comrade and friend Arlani pointed out, you can anticipate when a ship starts to move, you have a certain amount of time where you can react to that. But when you're talking about people and emotions and things like that, you
That's random, almost.
boop,
Yeah.
can't
It's
figure it
almost
out.
like, not that I can have anything to say this definitively, but it's almost like he's kind of like a savant, like
Yeah.
he has like a higher functioning
Mhm.
autism,
Yeah.
where some people just cannot gauge the emotions of people. And frankly, I don't blame them, because emotions can be random and weird and very
Yeah.
unprecedented at times, but very hyper focused and incredibly capable at doing very specific tasks.
Yeah.
And I got that impression from Thrawn, that he's incredibly focused, incredibly intelligent, and able to, and as we saw in Rebels, able to deduce everything you need to know about a person just based on based on their artwork, based
Yeah.
on their culture.
Yep.
We saw that how he was heavily involved with Sabine's artwork,
Mhm.
Hera and the Twi'lek, at least her clan,
Right.
and he was able to figure out everything he needed to know about them as his enemies just by collecting
Exactly.
and examining the artwork. And I thought that was like, you're telling me we got a gentleman villain? Like
Yeah.
we finally got, like, this is what I would imagine.
Oh, don't
Governor.
forget about Dooku.
Oh yeah,
The
that's
most
true.
gentlemanly of
That's true.
them.
The way that they portrayed him, I mean, that elegant beard though, like, you know,
Right.
I'm not purporting I want to be a Sith, but they did know how to dress, you know,
Yeah.
that Dooku had that drip, you know? So he and I would also imagine this would be Governor Tarkin, you know, if Tarkin lasted more than the events of A New Hope, if we actually got to see his character fleshed out. I know that his character was fleshed out in some graphic novels, but I would imagine that he and Thrawn were contemporaries, so, like, you know, still kind of like rivals at the time, because
I
we did see that when we saw Tarkin in Rebels, he was not a governor, or was he?
I think he was a Moff. Oh,
He was definitely
no.
Grand Moff as well, but he was
Yeah.
not an admiral like Thrawn was. So technically,
No. Because he gave Arinda her governorship.
okay,
He was the one that granted her the governorship. I believe that was in the first
okay,
Thrawn book.
yeah, that's true.
And then so he had some sort of power to do something.
Yeah, I mean,
And he was almost like a mediator in Thrawn treason. There was
Tarkin.
yeah, Tarkin was between Thrawn and Krennic.
Okay.
There was a dispute about the Project Stardust, the Death Star, and he almost acted like a mediator between Krennic and Thrawn, with Palpatine, you know, also trying to figure out what they were going to do. So
Each of
it
them had their
seems
own. I'm sorry to interrupt. Each of them had
no,
their
you're fine.
own projects. Interesting. You know how, like,
Yes.
Krennic, for instance, his project was Project Stardust, the Death
Yes.
Star, and then Tarkin, like, oh, yoink, this was my
Yeah.
idea the whole time.
Right.
Such a power move on Tarkin's part. That's why I loved Rogue One.
Yeah.
And then Thrawn's pet project was what do they call it? The Tri Defender or something like that?
TIE Defender.
The TIE
There was
Defender, which
the
was
part of the
essentially
TIE series.
it was a tri-fighter.
Yeah. Yeah, literally.
It was 3
Had
wings.
those 3 little things on it.
Yeah, the 3-pronged TIE Defender, as opposed to like what we saw before is the 2-pronged.
Yeah.
I still never understood the landing sequence of those things. Like, if you're gonna make them expensive,
Yeah.
make the landing a little bit, whatever. Anyway, but that also goes to the character, you know, to the personality of the character.
Mhm.
Whereas Krennic was an architect, and I really liked
Yeah.
his character. And, you know, I don't know if you know this, but for Mike and I, our backgrounds are in architecture. So
Oh,
when I
nice.
saw a character like Krennic, who was
Mhm.
essentially a space station architect, I'm like, this is a bad guy I can get behind, you know?
Yeah.
But then Thrawn is a military leader.
Yeah.
So his response is going to be military in nature. Very
Yeah.
much like Moff Gideon. His
Mhm.
project was the Dark Troopers. Again,
Right.
he was a military leader, so his response was going to be military in nature. In this case, you know, super soldiers, cyber soldiers, whatever. So the tri-fighter was his response. And then I guess it was Tarkin's job, or rather to act as a mediator to the Emperor. Like, yeah, this project works, this project won't work.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, you get this funding, things like that.
And, you know, it kind of surprised me that he went with the TIE Defenders for a little while, because I can't remember if it was called like the Target Initiative or whatever, but it was the reasons that the TIE Fighters don't have shields is because of Tarkin. They wanted to cut costs. But they also found out that
wow.
he was he's a cheap dude. He looks like a cheap leather bag, but he
that's no way to disrespect the dead.
He made it so that, you know, they cut costs. Yeah. He so he made the point not to put shields on them, and that was basically to scare the Imperial Navy and the TIE pilots into, well, you better pilot that thing real good or you're going to get blown up.
So let me get this straight. Because at that point, if you don't, I mean, there were enlistments,
Yeah.
but when you get there, it's hard to like go to your CO and say, hey, can I get a transfer out of here, to another base? It's
Yeah.
like, no, you either signed up or you were enslaved by the Imperial
Yeah.
Army, and tough.
Yeah, sucks to suck.
Yep, that's the price, buddy. You're in it.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
that it really shows to Thrawn's character, I think, especially that when he came out with the TIE defenders, that he put shields on them and he put more guns on them to protect the pilots and make them feel safe and make them feel like they were worth something and not dispensable. Because that's all Tarkin saw them as, is just expendable people.
kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
Actually.
And Thrawn saw his people as his people. And I think that speaks to his character a lot. Everyone that he's ever worked with, they looked up to him and they thought a lot of him. And there are a lot of people out there that say that, people who were under Thrawn wouldn't necessarily die for the Empire. They're dying for Thrawn. They're dying to protect him and everything he stands for, because he's, kind of the best thing they have, given the circumstances.
Yeah, very much unlike Vader, where it's you die because of Vader.
Right.
He will literally choke you out.
Don't choke on your aspirations.
Again, another reason why that's one of my favorite movies. As to wit, the only pun, or one of the few puns in the entire Star Wars universe, and it had to come from Vader himself. I loved it.
It was a good
I
one.
loved it.
I think Ahsoka said something similar in the Clone Wars series. She said something about don't choke on something. I can't remember what it was, but it was like in response to something. I thought that was an interesting little thing.
Little tie-in. Yeah, there's a little tie-in there. We don't know. You wrote a note that we don't know how old Thrawn is.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of in Solo, where Luke goes to Chewbacca and he goes like, "You're 190?" He's like, "Wow, you look great."
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We don't know how old he is. I am hoping that we get some sort of answers. We still have 2 more books in the Ascendancy series to come out. The next one comes out in about a month. I'm so excited. But we don't really know.
Yeah.
I would personally put him around 5 years older than Anakin. Just given the way that he carries himself. I mean,
he's more mature.
Yeah, he's more mature than Anakin.
But then again, I think everyone is more mature than Anakin.
Right. There's that. But I mean, it's they're in the Chaos Rising book. It kind of goes from when he was adopted. I think he was adopted, but he was a teenager. And I don't think he had finished like actual school yet. But it doesn't tell you what year it is or anything like that.
So Anakin, for reference, Anakin and Thrawn can be there are contemporaries. They're relatively, you estimate they're relatively close in age.
Yeah.
If at the end of the events of Return of the Jedi, when Vader dies, he is in his late 40s.
Yeah,
I think it is.
So. Yeah.
And if in the events of the end of Rebels, which happens just a few years before A New Hope, he's blasted off into space, via purgle farts. Right. We don't know. He's still relatively young, so he's probably like in his late 20s, maybe early 30s. Yeah. Am I getting this right?
So. Because he was one of the youngest, or if not the youngest, commander of the Ascendancy. And they made it a point to say that he was very young to be in that position.
Okay.
So that kind of makes me think that he's in his 20s around the Clone Wars time.
Right.
Like, in like Attack of the Clones era Anakin kind of a thing. Actually, no, I guess it would be, it's after the Jedi braid.
Yeah, Rebels takes place, I think, like at most a handful of years before A New Hope.
Yeah. And when him and Thrawn meet, he's a commander, he's young for the first time when Anakin and Thrawn meet on Batuu.
Right.
Um
Oh, what?
yes. So
Really?
yes, that was another reason that was very exciting to be a Galaxy's
Interesting.
Edge. The majority of Thrawn alliances that was written in like young Thrawn and young Anakin's
hmm
perspective was on Batuu. And
So I'm sorry. Does this take place in the Timothy Zahn books in Legends or in canon?
in canon.
Okay, that
Yeah.
would make sense.
Yeah. It was like right after the parks opened or something like that, and he was so excited to write about the park.
Yeah, I would.
It's like
I
nice.
would.
So I guess he went there and he just kind of, picked up landmarks and things like that.
Man,
And
I wonder if there is now in canon and in written
yeah,
form, or at the least, in his head, if there's a specific spot in Black Spire Outpost where Anakin and Thrawn actually met.
I think that Black Spire Outpost was mentioned in the book, and I think that it was the like little food shop.
Hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about? It's
Ronto's
like
Roasters?
I think so. I think it's
Okay.
like 4 shops or something like that inside that
Oh,
little
okay.
area.
Yeah.
But then there's like the food one, that was closed when we went
Man,
there.
that would kind of make
But
sense. And it would, because when you go into Ronto's Roasters, if you haven't been to Galaxy's Edge, there is the place where you can basically get Kentucky Fried Ronto. And it's like some meat product in a bun. But they have a repurposed pod racer engine hanging
that's
from the
right.
roof, pointing down, engine, exhaust downward, and mystery meat, which is the roast of whatever it's implied, is being turned on a spit by one of those like smelting robots, and he's just, forever just turning the crank. And I just have this image now of Anakin reminiscing over his pod racing days,
Yeah.
looking at all this strewn engines and parts all over, the Black Spire Outpost, and Thrawn studying him, making these
Yeah.
observations. Because if
There
I'm not mistaken, he figures out, but he doesn't say it, that Anakin is Vader,
yeah.
right?
Yes, that was a big part of Thrawn Alliances that he figured it out because of the way that he was flying his ship. He was
Interesting.
uh it was a particular maneuver that he had seen from Anakin. I feel like it had something to do with pod racing. I can't remember exactly what it was,
Spinning
but
is a good trick.
I think it was something about spinning. But he was like, "I've seen this before. I've seen this technique before." And I think that that's what it
Hmm.
was. I think it was because
That's
he was
very interesting.
some
Man,
sort of flying technique.
now this gives me a new appreciation and some more headcanon next time I go visit
Yeah.
Batu.
You
That's
know
pretty
what was
interesting.
super awesome, though? One of the cast members when I was there, I had my Thrawn bounding on and all sorts of stuff. I had my Imperial plaque on, and one of the cast members came up to me and he was like, "Grand Admiral Thrawn, it's great to have you back." And I was like, "Back? You have to have read the novels."
Hmm.
Or you're just saying that because you
Yeah.
work here.
I've
But
um I've heard that a lot of the cast members, well, not everyone, but at least when they opened up Galaxy's Edge, the original stock of cast members were heavily interviewed, and they need to make sure that they really were
yeah.
Star Wars fans.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be
Oh, I could
surprised.
tell.
Yeah.
They were It was fantastic. The immersion was great. I think about
Well,
that a lot.
so while we reminisce about our days of visiting Galaxy's Edge and Batu and Black Spire Outpost, why don't we take a minute and we'll take a break to hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back. And we're back. So there's a question I've been wanting to ask you. We talked about how Thrawn sort of he can determine who his opponents are, his weaknesses, how better to best them just by looking at aspects of their culture, looking at their art and their history. And humans in our timeline, we have a tremendous amount of history and culture that he could potentially pick and choose from. So if he was able to pick a fight, a formidable opponent from any artist in history, who would it be and why?
So it would have to be Picasso.
Okay.
um, I it just kind of seems so funny to think about it, like him just like, what are these weird shapes that vaguely resemble a horse or
Mm-hmm.
whatever? Why did he choose a square? Like it's just like weird
Mm-hmm.
color choices and just the style is very interesting.
It's
But then I
chaotic.
remembered that Guernica was a thing. Um, I'm not a art person. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not an art person, so I had to do my research on this one. But Guernica, or I think that's how you say it. I'm not entirely too sure, but it was basically a anti-war political art piece that was created as a response of the Spanish Civil War. Um, and it kind of went around to raise money. To It toured countries and stuff like that to raise money for the uh, building of Spain
Mm-hmm.
back. Um, but he would have to have, like, if he was going to pick that apart, um, because it's an anti-war thing. Would he understand that? Would he understand why people don't want to go to war?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's kind of the way that he thinks in general. I think that it's very black and white with him. That, why wouldn't you want to go to war to protect your country and blah 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't think about it from a citizen's perspective. Um, I think even in the book he doesn't really see anyone except for the Chiss species as being, quote unquote human or,
Mm-hmm.
worth anything. Uh, so
It's the
that's
Chiss way or the highway.
right.
Yeah. I feel like that's an interesting, that's formidable. And then there's also pictures of Picasso where he's got like the cowboy hat and like he's always,
Right.
I think I read a story somewhere that he would go to dinner parties and he would have like a dummy pistol with him. He would just whip it out and just like pop, pop, pop,
God.
pop. With one day, there has to have been at least one story somewhere where Picasso showed up with like a real revolver, and it was like, Paulo, Paulo, put that away.
Oh God.
And they weren't blanks, and they didn't even know about it. He was
Oh
that crazy.
God. There was a one guy I was reading about. I can't remember what his name is now. He's a famous painter, but he everyone thought he was crazy or something, and he would show up. He would show up in like weird outfits and like I
You're kind of describing almost every modern painter.
right, like just ugh.
I've got two. I mean, Thrawn. We've seen him as a physical combatant, but in a lot of these artists, I don't see them being able to go toe to toe with him for more than like 5-10 minutes. But then I can imagine him hearing, like, I've got this image of him walking down the hallways of the Louvre, the hallowed, corridors, and he's looking at these artwork, and he goes like, I can take him on, I could take him on, I could totally take her on. And then he's like, who's this guy? Who's this wing for? Who's this Van Gogh character? 10 minutes tops. Wait, he did what with his ear? Okay, 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Got it. And then you'll hear about like Salvador Dali, who is a very
That's
I
what
don't
I
know if,
was thinking of.
oh,
That's what I was
okay.
thinking of.
This man walked into dinner parties with an armadillo on a leash. Like you don't
Yes.
want to touch this man.
That's who
You
I was
didn't
thinking
you didn't
of.
know what he was carrying. there was there was a I took a tour of the Louvre several years ago, and there was this one artist, and very very similar to the idea of Guernica, where it was very anti-war.
Mhm.
This particular painting was very anti uh, royalty, anti-establishment in its
Yeah.
in a way. And when we did this tour, we were told that this painting had the blood of a royal mixed into it. And yeah. So here's the thing. In history, artists used to buy, whether they knew it or not, something called mummy brown, which is a particular pigment. And the way that they got that brown was it was ground up bits of literal mummies. And as we know, the Egyptian pharaohs and their families used to have their organs and certain remains preserved elsewhere outside of the actual sarcophagus. So what was popular at the time was buying, acquiring somehow these organs, grinding them up because they were basically dried blood. They had more brown, like a dark ochre kind of pigment to them.
Yep.
Fast forward to 1800s during the French aristocracy. Louis the 14th, I think it was the 14th. Yeah, Louis the 14th and his lineage at the time, it was popular for them to do the same thing. When royals died and their families, family members, they would have their organs removed and preserved elsewhere. Well, that was happening for a while, except this also happened to coincide with the French Revolution. So normally their remains would have been preserved in I can't remember it right now, but they were put in a particular church. Well, the revolts came, those organs were taken, as with everything else, and people came into possession of the literal organs of dead royals. So one particular artist named Martin Drolling, he was able to acquire some. He ground up the heart of the Sun King himself, Louis XIV, and he developed this ochre brown mummy pigment of his own. And one of his paintings, which is hanging in the Louvre today, is interior of a kitchen. And I couldn't help but see that this is, if you look up this painting and you see the picture, it is a very droll, ironic, his name is Martin Drolling, but it's a very droll, very humble interior scene where the only source of light is coming from a window on the far end of the scene. And it's just peasants with their pots and pans and brooms, and looks dusty. And how perfect, in terms of the irony of all ironies, was a painting depicting a very humble scene of like French peasants where the physical paint that they used was the literal blood of a royal. Like, how metal is that?
It is quite
And if
metal.
and I can imagine that someone like Thrawn looking at this and going, he takes a second to like, yeah, no, I totally get it. I don't even want to fight this guy. I want him to paint more of this. Let's get some more of this mummy brown, see what he can do.
Oh man, I knew about Mummy Brown, but I
Mhm.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that part. Uh,
Yeah.
um,
And it's
ooh,
not even like a big painting. It's no bigger than a computer monitor. It's
mm,
just, almost as big as the Mona Lisa, which if you haven't seen it in person is tiny and super overrated or whatever. And that's just my personal opinion. Anyway, so yeah, just wanted to put that, put that little cultural note in here. Um,
awesome. My
let's talk
mouth was like
about
hanging open the whole time. I know people can't see my reaction, but I'm like,
yeah, it was a
that was
weird, and there was more than one painting that he had. To my knowledge, that's the only one that's in the Louvre, but he was fairly popular at the time. And can you imagine, like, oh yeah, by the way, this has parts of Louis XIV in there.
that's
Because there.
crazy.
It
And
was a weird, man. 1800s were a weird period of time
yeah,
in human
that is
history.
true.
Just gloss over that. So I kind of wanted to do this thing, moving forward with talking about canon,
Mhm.
and pose this question. What could go wrong? And the idea is that as fans, we see what's going on, without being too overtly critical. I think it's okay to have a certain healthy sense of being critical
Right.
when questioning certain storytelling elements, because this is a fandom, it's a storyline that we like, and we want, we want to see what's best, or we want the best for it rather.
Right.
So my question is, with the character of Thrawn, especially now that he's been reintroduced in The Mandalorian,
Mhm.
what could go wrong in terms of how this would affect the timeline?
Um, so I have a little bit of a theory that we are going to get some sort of version of Heir to the Empire. I mean, granted, we're not going to see Mara Jade. I really do not think that Mara Jade Skywalker
Nah,
is
she's
going to
buried.
exist.
Nah,
Like,
she's buried, man.
I know that people want it so bad. They were like, "Oh my god, Thrawn's coming. Mara Jade's going to come too." And it's like, no.
Because they interacted with each other. You mentioned that,
Yes.
like, the perspective of Luke and Leia. So at that time, Luke was married to Mara Jade in
Yep.
Legends. So
Yep.
so Mary Jade also had interactions with Thrawn.
Yes.
Okay,
I believe Zahn was the one that created her character,
really?
as well. I
Hmm.
think. Um, I can't remember if she was also created for this series or not, but you know, fact check yourself at home. uh, don't listen to me. Um, but as far as the timeline goes, I mean, the I believe the beginning part of the Heir to the Empire, it's been a very long time since I read it, was basically this one all-powerful Jedi who was, Thrawn's nemesis. Um, uh, Jor Jordas? No, that's some other guy. I can't
Jordash?
remember. It sounds like a singer.
DoorDash.
I know.
Jordans. Air Jordans.
Can't remember his name to save my life. He's like an old guy, and on the I remember looking at the Heir to the Empire book for the first time, and it was very like um A New Hope, where it's like the shirtless, but it's not like shirtless Luke, it's like shirtless old man, like Merlin, like like holding something, and I'm like, what is this?
Okay.
Um, I don't understand this.
Yeah.
But
That
apparently
was a
he's
dark
this
time in Timothy Zahn's creative writing process.
it was that was something else. Um, but, uh, I don't think he's gonna exist either, because there's no record of this man
Yeah.
existing.
He
And
was just credited as shirtless old man.
shirtless old man. And he's a big part of it. But, you have Thrawn, who has decided to pick up the remnants of the Empire after the events of Return of the Jedi, because these books were created as like a sequel trilogy.
Okay.
This is what people are talking about when they say that this is the sequel trilogy that they wanted versus, the one that we got, which both are fine.
Hmm.
Both are great.
Yeah.
But this was something that was a little bit closer in timeline. Um, but as far as, how much is it going to change the timeline? Probably, not really anything substantial. I think that they are going to have Thrawn pick up the remnants of the Empire and then, sort of do his thing. I think that we're going to see him die. I don't want to, but I think that we are going to see him die.
Yeah, but
Um,
all the great villains gotta die eventually,
Eventually. I don't think he's going to die of
or
old
come
age.
back as a Strandcast or clone or
Right.
hologram, or I don't know. I'm so confused now.
Um,
What about this character that we were introduced to in The Mandalorian? Uh, Morgan
Mor-
Elsbeth.
Morgan Elsbeth, there's a theory floating around that she might possibly be Night Sister, and I'm not entirely too sure how that would work.
What?
Yeah, so apparently the hair and makeup person was doing her character, and she posted on Instagram, Morgan Elsbeth, survivor of or last Night Sister in from Dathomir or something like that, in the caption after she posted it.
Mm.
Um, and that the post no longer exists, probably because they told her to
Yes.
take it down.
Probably
Um,
because it was. I mean, for a lot of reasons, it was a good idea to take it down immediately. But I also I'm not seeing it.
right.
I'm not seeing it at
I
all.
I have mixed feelings about it. I feel like if that is a thing that actually happened, there are like screen grabs of it and stuff like
Hmm.
that. Maybe they told her, this is what she should look like, something like
Right.
this. And maybe she was like, oh,
I
it is this.
wonder. I wonder. Have you played Jedi Fallen Order?
Yes.
Okay, so I wonder if that may have been because I can't. You don't know when the creative processes for each of these two franchises begin and where they end, but they do overlap. And it could have
Mhm.
been, maybe she was supposed to be the last of the Night Sisters, but then I'm Marin, I
Marin.
think was her name.
Marin, yeah.
In Jedi Fallen Order, she is the last of the Night Sisters. So maybe there
Right.
was a last minute change where now Morgan Elsbeth is no longer a Night Sister, but
Right.
some Imperial loyalist of some kind, or at least her family was, and then Marin would be the last of it because they, there's talks of a sequel for Fallen Order, so we don't know
That
where
was
her story's going to go.
that was the thing too. When Ahsoka was talking to Din about it, she was like, this is Morgan Elsbeth. She lost everything in the Clone Wars, and so she decided to join the Imperial Navy to,
Hmm.
help build a system that, you know, to destroy
Yeah,
whatever. Um, so she was definitely in the Imperial Navy, so I don't
right.
understand how that would work if she was a Night Sister,
Yeah,
but
I'm not buying it.
um,
You can't shoehorn certain ideas just because we want to see a particular
right.
thing,
Yeah.
versus where Fallen Order is already sort of addressing that thing.
Yeah.
The whole
Yeah.
there's a whole Night Sisters time, arc in that game. So I think just leave it alone.
I will say I'm a little confused by her, um, it's like a tattoo or something on her hairline.
Right.
I thought it was jewelry, but apparently I zoomed in, it looks like a tattoo.
Could be a
So,
family mark or a clan
very
mark of some kind.
yeah.
My interpretation of that episode was that her family or whatever her clan were involved in
Yes.
the building of Imperial ships. That's why she has money. That's why, and I found that's probably like my favorite episode of The Mandalorian,
Mhm.
was because it covered so many different things, including
Yeah.
classicism, or
Mhm.
or not, class
Yeah.
distinctions,
Yeah.
poor versus ultra wealthy,
Yeah.
and then of course her part of the compound is vibrant and beautiful and green, and everything else is dirty and dusty and you know decrepit. um so I think she's a loyalist. We know that she's a loyalist. She's helping to pick up the pieces. What all the Easter eggs that we saw after the fact was the insignia to Thrawn
Yeah.
and his fleet
Yes.
on the droids, and I think
Mhm.
there was something else, and then of course the big name drop at
Right.
the end of the episode by Ahsoka.
So, I have a theory that, um, he might, or I'm sorry, not he, um, that Morgan Elsbeth had a connection to, God, I always forget his name. I had to write it down. Um, Pelion, Gilad Pelion, who was Thrawn's right hand man in the Legends trilogy. Um, he was, his confidant, his favorite boy.
Okay.
He was the captain of the Chimera,
Okay.
before Thrawn even got to it. So, he ended up becoming sort of like an apprentice to Thrawn, sort of a thing, or I guess you would call it a protege,
Okay.
um, the same way he did with Eli Vanto. But for Morgan Elsbeth, Gilad Pelion had been brought into canon in Rebels. I can't remember exactly what the situation was, but I believe it was in season 4 at some point, and Thrawn said, "Get Pelion," or "Get Captain Pelion," or something like that. And you hear him over like a comm or something like that. Um, so wherever he is, he's obviously not on the Chimera because that's where Thrawn is. He's somewhere, and they know each other. So I think that this is setting up possibly for Morgan and Pelion to go find Thrawn, and that's how Thrawn and Pelion end up
So
together.
you're saying that Morgan Elsbeth doesn't know where Thrawn is,
I think she
but
found him.
you think
I think she and Pelion went to go find him.
okay,
Because it seemed like, I think it's like around where he disappears is when he talks about Pelion. He's like, get Pelion on whatever. And things were falling apart or something like that. But I think that Morgan Elsbeth worked under Pelion, and when Thrawn went missing, you know, Pelion knows who Thrawn is, so he went looking for him with Elspeth. I think that
okay,
Elspeth might be somebody that Pelion holds in high regard, and that's how she ended up with the droids. and
Mhm.
and maybe because she saved him or something like that, he, here's something to protect you. You can take these droids that are on the Chimera.
Okay.
Because they had to have come from somewhere, and he's not just, hanging out. He's not toting droids everywhere. But I think that she found
What is he, Moff
the
Gideon?
Chimera.
Jeez, man. You just can't have droids to spare.
Right. I can't remember how many she had. I think it was 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, there was only like a couple.
Yeah.
Which would make
Yeah.
sense because if you were
But
in a small little backwater, you know, little fort encampment, whatever, you don't really need an entire squad of assassin droids when you already have literal manpower.
right.
Plus RoboCop.
Um exactly.
Yeah, oh, you
Um
good.
I think that if you read the novels, you kind of get the sense that Thrawn is not loyal to the Empire.
Hmm.
So I feel like if I hadn't watched Rebels, or if that didn't exist, and then we heard this name drop in The Mandalorian, I still am kind of confused, but um it is a little confusing because you see that his loyalty ultimately lies with the Chiss ascendancy and not with the Empire. And when Palpatine, dies, um, why would he hang around? Just go back home.
Yeah, yeah,
Once you're found, just go back home. So there has to be some reason why he stuck around. And I really want to know what that reason is.
yeah.
Um, Maybe because he felt like he owed whoever saved him, and he stuck around to help them or something like that. Uh, but I mean, his ultimate loyalty lies with the Chiss, unless something happened to them that we don't know about, which would be devastating, and I would hate it.
Mm. The Empire
um,
does have a reputation of burning over people that have helped them in the
yeah,
past. So it is entirely possible. Or maybe
yeah,
it's just hard to go home, so he sticks around.
yeah,
Tactically speaking, or logistically speaking, rather, it makes sense to stick around where you're at and then try to earn money
yeah,
and selling to whatever's left, whether the highest bidder being Imperial or Mercs or whatever the beginnings of the First Order,
yeah,
which is also something that I feel like Mandalorian is like hinting, just little tiny Easter eggs. But they're hinting towards the beginnings of the First Order.
yeah,
So maybe he's helping build them up, and maybe that's where the business model is. So now he's like independent. Now that he has all this, he's a tactical genius. He has experience. He has the reputation. He has the resources. You might as well. He's not doing it for greed, but he's like, my brain is worth something. Let me do something with it.
yeah,
But we'll have to wait and see.
yeah, yeah, for sure. It's it's just very interesting, and I'm very, very, very curious to see how they work it out. It just kind of popped into my head though, but another possibility for him not going back is because in order to get to unknown in the unknown regions, you have to have a navigator.
Oh, kind of
You
like a person, like a
Yeah,
Skywalker in this
yeah,
case, or in this
you
case, like we saw in Rise of Skywalker, he had to have that Sith holocron Kylo
mhm,
Ren so that he can navigate to Exegol.
yes, yeah. So and he had Vader do it for him in alliances. He In order to get out of a sticky situation, he had to have Vader navigate the ship for him because he couldn't do it. Um so in order for him to go home, he would have to have some sort of force sensitive, somebody who could use precognition. It really couldn't be anybody. So there might be a possibility that Ezra helps him out, takes him home,
Wow. I didn't
maybe.
even think about that. That was going to be my
Someone
my follow-up question. So if you haven't seen it yet, at the very end of Rebels is this moment where Ezra boards the Chimera and the Purgle, he's able to communicate with the Purgle, and the Purgle fulfill the prophecy of the Bendu, which is he'll have arms wrapped around his neck or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And once Thrawn is incapacitated to a degree, Ezra is able to convince the Purrgil to jump to hyperspace and blast off. And there's that quiet moment where everybody's looking up and like,
Yep.
what just happened?
Yep.
So it is yet to be explained what happens to Ezra.
Mm-hmm.
For a period of time, Ezra and Thrawn will be in the same place in the same period of time.
Yes.
We know what happens to Hera to a degree later on.
Mm-hmm.
We now know what happens to Ahsoka. We don't know where Sabine is. It's inferred at the epilogue. Oh, man, this is a conversation.
Yeah.
There's a conversation we had with Mike. I can't remember if it's epilogue or prologue.
Epilogue's at the end.
Epilogue's at the end, right?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
His argument was epi, like an EpiPen. You take it at the end.
Honestly,
when you have a.
I
Anyway.
almost said eulogy, so
yeah.
I know it's not eulogy,
but it's sort of. So we know that at some unknown. Let's hope it's not a eulogy. So we know that at some unknown time has passed. Sabine is older. Yeah. Ahsoka is also older. We don't know if they meet up again. It's inferred that they meet up so they can go find Ezra because Sabine has to fulfill a promise. And we think that's to find him. But we don't know if this takes place after the events of The Mandalorian or before. It's not confirmed. So does Sabine come together with Ahsoka to go find Ezra? Is that the reason why Ahsoka is so fixated on trying to find Thrawn? Does Hera meet up? Where's Chopper? Is he still committing more murders?
Probably.
These are the questions that we have that we would very much like to know. And I feel like this is still years out until we find these answers.
Yeah.
But they're very interesting questions to ask because I feel like they will have a resolution eventually. Like you heard the rumors now that we might see Hera in Rangers of the New Republic.
I am all for that.
Oh yeah, that's
like, that would be so
totally cool. That'd be so cool. I mean, she does have. It's not a. It's not a what's it called? A on screen, kind of like what they did with Ahsoka. I'm drawing a blank on how do they call that? Live action.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a live action version of Hera, but we did see a more realistic version of Hera in the Star Wars Squadrons game.
Yeah.
And I think they did a great job. So all they need to do is get the actress that they did the mocap for her and just do that. And then they're like, I'd be great with that.
Yeah.
And
I mean, there's a possibility we could see her in Andor. I was thinking about that too, because in Rogue One, we hear her on the comm. And we also see Chopper somewhere. I didn't know that Chopper was in Rogue One until like a couple of weeks ago.
I didn't know that either. He was there for like a split second,
but he was there.
For me, it doesn't count. No. It's like R2. It's like saying R2D2 and C3PO were in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like, no, they were there on a wall. Like that was hieroglyph doesn't count, man.
But I mean that. Total possibility we could see him in Andor if we don't get her in.
I absolutely need to see a live action Chopper. I mean, there's proof that there's physical BB-8s.
Yeah.
They had someone build a real
the TikTok guy with the Chopper that he built.
And that's my goal. My goal is to build that. I mean, he 3D prints everything.
So bad. And he makes it shake.
He goes. He just like the hands come out.
I love it. I need
that. I need some real life war criminal robots in my life.
Absolutely.
So we don't. So yeah, there's not confirmed, but heavy rumors. Which if it's kind of like what happened with Rosario Dawson, where it's just everybody clamoring, and then someone in the writers' room were like, "Yeah, you know what? Actually, Rosario Dawson would be a good fit for Ahsoka," and then they made it happen.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a great example of that actually happening. Yeah. Nothing against Cara Dune as a character, but it's unlikely we're going to see Cara Dune again.
Yeah.
So having someone like Hera being on the forefront as a strong female lead,
Yeah.
and Hera specifically, everybody's favorite space mom, that'd be
Yeah.
a great addition to the Rangers series.
I think that would be, I mean, I'm really trying to think of a maternal character who was also very in her own power and kind of served as, not like a role model, but someone that other people could see themselves in.
Hmm.
Um,
I think that's
that
the
had
definition of a role
children.
model,
Like,
but
you know,
semantics.
that's true.
I mean, it's no big deal. It's just the literal
But
definition, but okay.
it's just the literal definition. It's fine. But I mean, I like you have Shmi, but like she didn't really do anything. Um, like
She didn't do anything. She
yeah,
didn't even give a good reason. Oh, he was just born one day.
yeah, like, she's just kind of
Okay.
there. I mean, it would be so awesome to see like a mother
A more
character
maternal character, yeah.
being a super cool pilot lady
Hmm.
that kicks butt. Like, I
You know,
would love it.
the argument, some may argue, well, what about Leia? The problem is there was a big disconnect between when Leia was in her prime during the
Yeah.
rebellion, and then when Leia is in the resistance as a general. We didn't see them raising Ben.
Yeah, we didn't
If
really
anything,
see
it's sort
her
of the
as
consequences of the way that they raised him.
right. Yeah, we didn't see her with her
Hmm.
child at all.
Yeah,
I mean, you kind of got some of that from some of the books and stuff, but it wasn't really anything groundbreaking or anything.
yeah,
Um, but I would love it. I would love it so much to see her on.
yeah. I would too, and I just want to see more Chopper. And then there's also the Ahsoka series. If you
Yes.
can if you can't tell, he's one of my favorite droids. There's also the Ahsoka series.
It's him or Zero that are my favorite.
Who?
000. He
Who's that?
is he was made for the Dr. Aphra comics. Um
Oh, the protocol,
yes.
the murder protocol droid.
Yes.
He's like C-3PO but all black.
Yes. And he like
Ooh,
talks
yeah.
about draining blood all the time. Like
Yeah,
constantly.
that sounds on par with someone who's a Sith enthusiast. I actually have a Dr. Aphra episode planned a
Really
few months from now, so we'll
nice.
talk about 000.
Oh, I love it.
There's also the Ahsoka series coming up, and now that Ahsoka is getting at least one season of live action Ahsoka, does
Mhm.
I'm excited to see live action Sabine, because we are definitely Sabine
Yeah.
stans in this household.
Yeah.
So seeing her, how does that play up with the end of Rebels? Is that a true epilogue? Where is that going to fit in the timeline compared with Thrawn? Like, we need a flowchart.
Right. I had been thinking about that. Because I think I finished. It took me a while to finish all of Rebels, but I can't remember if it was before or after. I don't even remember seeing this epilogue scene. I don't remember it to save my life. Um, I genuinely like it's just not popping up. I can
Hmm.
see it because she's in the white robes, but like
Right, right.
I
I
don't
mean,
remember actually
it
watching it.
wasn't much. It was Lothal, very what was it called? The one place in the Neverending Story where it's like it was like
Oh,
not the
yeah.
Pearl Tower or something like that.
Crystal
Anyway,
Castle. I don't know.
Crystal, not the Dark Crystal. That's another Lucas. That's another Jim Henson franchise.
That's right.
Um, Great
Scary.
movie. And if you haven't seen it, the series was actually pretty cool too.
It's
But
terrifying.
yeah, I know that's what made it great. It was absolutely terrifying. Mark Hamill actually did the voice of one of the Vulture villains, the Skeksis.
Really?
Yeah,
I
man,
didn't know that.
Mark Hamill spent more time portraying villains than he has actual heroes, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Love that guy.
I've gone off track. I'm sorry. Anyway,
No, you're
so
fine.
the epilogue is Lothal is free of Imperial rule.
Yeah.
It's very pristine. It's very white and beautiful. Um, it's meant to appeal. It's meant to appear that it's back in where it should have been.
Mhm.
Pre-Empire. Sabine is on the same tower that Ezra sort of grew up in when you first see him in the first episode, and she's got her pixie cut, but she's still got her Mandalorian multicolored outfit. and then she meets up with, there's some weird ship, like a big sail ship comes in, and that's Ahsoka's ride, and she comes in very, Gandalf the Grey with her staff and hood.
Mm-hmm.
They don't say anything. It's just narration on Sabine's part saying, "I got to fulfill a promise," and I think it's inferred that she's got to go to find Ezra. So again, no one really can confirm where in the timeline that's happening. And I just
if they ended up splitting off, like that, and that's why we don't
like
see
divide and
her with
conquer,
Ahsoka.
possible.
Like Ahsoka's going to go find Thrawn, and
Yeah,
presumably Ezra and Thrawn are no longer in the same area because
right.
he's been mentoring this other
It would kind of
person.
make sense. There would be no reason why Ahsoka and Sabine would both be in the same sort of encampment trying to get information from Elsbeth when Ahsoka's capable of doing that on her own, and Sabine can go and find info elsewhere and then just regroup after the fact.
That is interesting. I wonder if she like immediately finds him with Thrawn, or
Maybe.
he goes off and does something else. I don't know.
And
I don't know
speaking of
how he gets away. I don't know.
yeah, and speaking of Sabine, how does this play in with the events of The Mandalorian when Bo-Katan is trying to restore Mandalore?
Right.
Maybe this might actually test her loyalties. Is she loyal to her friend or to her people?
Yeah. That's because it was Sabine that gave her
Initially, the
the
Darksaber, yeah.
right? Um, and that was a very interesting thing in The Mandalorian. I couldn't really understand that.
No one does.
Why she was upset about it, but
not even the Mandalorian. He doesn't understand what's going on. And that's what I love about his character. Is like, okay, here you go. No, I yield. Oh no, but that's not how it works.
I'm sitting there like, but didn't you just take
Nobody's
it
gonna know.
Nobody's
gonna know. They're gonna know.
Nobody's gonna know.
Oh my god.
But it's yeah, I couldn't, I genuinely did not understand that at all. But I mean, she has to know, well, she does know who Sabine is. Would she know where she is? And why wouldn't Sabine be with her?
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
possible. It is possible that she knows because she knows where Ahsoka is, and Ahsoka's in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So if she had that kind of information, they probably have. They did connect earlier, just before Din Djarin meets up with Bo-Katan.
We're probably gonna get some more Bo-Katan action in the.
I'm okay with that. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Actually, speaking of which, hold on, give me a second. I'm all for my.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you.
That's awesome.
Thank you. I'd be okay with calling Bo-Katan a new Disney princess.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got one last question for you.
Yeah.
What are if we ever see Thrawn in live action, what would your expectations be?
2 words. Cheek bones.
You can't. I don't see it happening any other way. I don't see it happening any other way. What about the actor who actually voiced? I can't remember his name, but who actually voiced Thrawn?
Lars Mikkelsen. Yeah.
Lars Mikkelsen.
There are a lot of people who genuinely would not accept anybody else. Mm-hmm. Like they just wouldn't.
What's your take on that?
I mean, as long as they pick somebody who can embody the character, it's the voice that's really the main part of it that you really have to get, because it can't just be another British accent, because that's not where he's from. It's gonna have to be.
It's harrowing almost. Whenever you heard Thrawn speak, it commanded a presence.
Yeah.
Like with Ahsoka, I understood the decision to have Rosario Dawson as opposed to Ashley Eckstein, because Ashley Eckstein, with much respect to her, she's always going to sound like a little kid.
Right.
And in this timeline, Ahsoka's an adult.
Right.
And the way that she was always portrayed in Clone Wars or Rebels, she was, I don't want to say childish, because she, at least, well, she was in the beginning, but she grew up.
Right.
She had these experiences, but she did sound somewhat childlike
Yeah.
versus now she's an adult.
And I mean, that's just kind of translation for voice acting in general. When you're voice acting a cartoon, you're gonna make it sound like a cartoon,
Yeah.
and it's, like, it's more exaggerated than it normally would be, and I don't know how she would like, translate that back
Hmm.
into, like, a live action setting sort of a thing. But, I mean, I think that they picked well. I think that Rosario Dawson was a good pick. Um I appreciate their decision. I totally understand why, Ashley Eckstein wasn't picked for it.
Hmm.
Um, but
With someone like Lars, though, he also may have he's a very lithe, he's a uh, thin frame,
yes.
um, about the same height. There's a lot you can do with
Yeah.
hair and makeup. I feel like that would be a good choice where the voice actor is the actor
I
for this character.
I think that uh a lot of people when they talk about that they don't like this choice or that they don't want Lars to do it, they want, Benedict Cumberbatch to do it instead. Um my point of, it's just that doesn't really make a lot of sense age-wise because Thrawn, we're getting old man Thrawn. We're not getting,
Mm.
hip, you know, i-
Yeah, I wouldn't
late
describe Thrawn
20s
as hip.
Thrawn.
He's not some hello, fellow citizens. Do you wish to join me in an imbibement in the local beverage establishment? You
He
mean
probably
the bar?
he
No
totally would do
thanks, buddy.
that.
We're good.
But I mean, yeah, like it's no, I feel like Lars's age is perfect. I think that his facial structure is perfect. I
Hmm.
think that um, his voice is
I,
it's his voice,
yeah, I wonder if to a degree, well, in in the original Timothy Zahn books,
Mhm,
on the covers they had a depiction of Thrawn, but it was more
mhm,
like a general look of what the chiss would look like.
mhm.
And I feel like for the animated version, they sometimes they'll do this in cartoons. They'll actually model the character after the voice actor. And I wonder if
Yeah.
they did that with Thrawn. I mean, I can't prove it.
Um,
Um,
it definitely seems that way because there's so there was a comic book companion to Heir to the Empire, as well as the new canon
mhm.
Thrawn novel. So if you compare the two, you have Thrawn who has a more, let's say, natural head shape,
Mhm.
more like a human sort of a thing. And then you have Legends Thrawn, who literally looks like an Easter Island head, like just looks like a box.
Okay.
Like, so if
Oof.
I mean,
They
I don't know
they
how
did our
you
boy dirty.
they did him
They
dirty.
massacred my boy.
Old Man Thrawn was a choice. His visual was a choice, but that's what
Yeah, a decision was made, and it was a very not a great one, but okay.
no, it wasn't a good one. So, with I could totally see that because they definitely changed the way he
Yeah.
looked.
Oof.
Absolutely.
But
And I think
cheekbones.
he was
Cheekbones definitely need.
very
Sorry, I need to take this down. Sorry.
yeah,
Cheekbones definitely need to be the thing.
yeah,
Otherwise, it's like in the way that he spoke was very. There's
yeah,
something unnerving about when someone
yeah,
is constantly just. It's not monotone, but it is
yeah,
very low and kind of whispery,
yeah.
and everything that he said was very succinct
Mhm.
and almost to the point.
Yes.
There's something very
Nothing
unnerving about that.
nothing, wavered
Hmm.
him ever. He would just, you could be yelling at him, he'll be in the middle of the sentence and he'll stay the
The
same
same, yeah.
tone. It's terrifying.
What So, on a final note, how are you feeling about the future of this character, Thrawn?
I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous.
Mhm.
Um,
It's your boy. It's like
it
you've come to love this character.
I this is, definitely the first character in Star Wars in general that I have really delved into and cared so much about. So you would say I'm a little protective of my boy. Um,
You
but
actually have one right behind you, if I'm not mistaken, right? I
yep,
can't see it because the camera's kind of cut off.
my little Thrawn from Galaxy's Edge.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, he I feel like because of the new novels that have come out, I am much more hopeful
Mm-hmm.
because Zahn just kind of was like, here's as much content as possible. Here's
Yeah.
6 canon books that you can pull from that describe his personality. And I hope we do get something a little bit different than what we see in Rebels, because he is a little bit more evil, I guess you would say, in Rebels.
Then he actually is,
Um
or rather than the way that he was portrayed visually.
Yeah, yeah. In the novels, he's a little bit more, I wouldn't say passive, but uh, he's like the guy with the speeder bike. He blows him up.
Mm-hmm.
He makes him kill himself, basically. That seemed very out of character for me. I don't think Thrawn would do something like that, especially not to factory workers, the people that
Mm-hmm.
can't help that they're there. Um,
Yeah, that's something you mentioned. I didn't know that about Thrawn's upbringing, but he has a very, well, not riches, but he has a very rags to riches kind of story where
yeah,
he knows what it's like to grow up in a humble environment.
yeah,
So
yes,
if anything, he's a protagonist. He's kind of like, he's almost like Thanos in a sense, where lately there's these strings of this string of villains that are no longer two-dimensional, but you're like,
hmm
you know what? Um, he's actually right.
yeah.
He actually might be onto something, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like Thrawn is one of those characters where the execution of his decisions are questionable, or something where it draws a moral, crosses the line morally speaking.
Yeah.
Um, but the justification or the reasoning behind those decisions rather is definitely something to contemplate,
Yeah.
you know. Um, well, thanks a lot for joining in and talking about
Of
Thrawn.
course.
And this was a really fun episode, so I really thank
Yeah.
you for your help.
Of course. Of course. I
Um,
loved doing it. I love talking about Thrawn.
really,
There's
I couldn't tell.
there's so much to talk about.
So, just want to talk for a second. I've been connecting more on people with fellow fans on Star Wars on TikTok as well as Instagram. Currently, I actually have a giveaway for it's right here, actually. So I've got a giveaway for a 3D printed piece of Beskar. Right now, the giveaway is actually happening just on TikTok, and it's running until the 12th of March. But in case you can't participate in that, if you're listening, I've got plenty of other giveaways I've got planned. I've got a 3D printed Millennium Falcon. I've got some Stormtroopers. I've got a few other things that I have planned in the future. So just make sure you please follow us on Instagram as well as on TikTok. And so that way you can keep an eye for future gifts. And speaking of social media, V, how is it that our listeners can find you?
So you can primarily find me on TikTok, at AlderaanSurvivor, all one word. And then I'm also on Instagram. I don't really ever use it, but also AlderaanSurvivor.
Like, I'm
Um,
legally obligated to just have an Instagram.
right? Like
Yeah.
everyone's legally obligated to have a Facebook for some reason, even though none of us log into it.
Yeah, I mean, I can get into how there's minor advantages if you're a small shop in terms of like tagging things and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But speaking of small shop, you also have a small shop. You have an Etsy shop, right?
I do. Yes.
How is it that people can find your shop?
I am a Crimson Axe Outpost on Etsy. I sell little cups and custom confetti
Like
and
tumblers?
yeah, like
Okay.
the snow globe tumblers, and then
Oh,
I
cool.
make little confetti pieces to go inside the little floaty parts. It's fun. It's fun stuff.
Awesome.
I'm always coming out with new stuff, so
Oh, that's cool.
yeah, that's
All
where you
right.
can
Well,
find me.
that's all for this episode. Thank you all for joining us and listening in. Thank you, V, for helping us out.
Thank you for having me.
So if you like this episode, please subscribe, share, write a review for us on Apple Podcasts. We really can't thank you enough how much that means to us, because it means that it improves our ranking as well as helps other people find the show. You can also follow us on Instagram at DeathWatch Podcast, on Twitter at DeathWatchCast, as well as on TikTok at DeathWatchCast. But also, if you want to chime in, if we forgot to mention something, or if you have a suggestion for a future episode, you can also email us at deathwatchpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. This is the way.
This is the way.
Thanks for listening. This is the way. You can do that too if you want.
I'm so sorry. I was looking.
I should have said that, to make it clear. But yeah.
I was thinking about that when I was reading the thing. I was like, usually Mike says this is the way, and it's like,
Yeah.
always by himself.
So
Hang
if
on,
you want to,
let me throw one in there.
yeah.
This is the way. There you go.
Perfect.